Now, normally at the end here, I like to recap and give a small review about the content we just discussed. But I think it's best to just leave it here for now and have this video be a setup guide for anyone who wants to undertake this process. And there's also a lot I have to say about why you would undergo this process, for the glory of playing older games on a series unit. So the following video will be all about what I just mentioned to help you determine if this is something you want to do with your machine. Greetings! My name is Efrain and I like playing games on the Xbox and telling you all about those games in a video. Thanks for tuning in. Although Xbox has a huge selection of games, what with Game Pass, huge studios under their umbrella, and their big backwards compat list, I still love using Xbox's dev mode to emulate some of the classic titles. And many of you may be wondering,
but why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Well, to put it simply, because I can. Xbox gives you the power to emulate games at a really good quality for a pretty affordable price, giving you far more options than the console competitors in terms of quantity of games for the price you pay. Let's go ahead and elaborate on these points further to make this an actual video, starting with the quality you can expect when you emulate. So I had to wait to make this video because RetroArch, the program used to emulate on the Xbox, kept getting updates, improving some things and breaking others, as updates annoyingly tend to do. But I felt the most comfortable with RetroArch 1.9.12, and here is my experience with all the games I tested, admittedly more than I needed. But you know what? It was great. The Xbox series could easily handle all the classics. The OG Nintendo, the SNES, Sega Genesis, all the Gameboys, and the Nintendo DS all ran very well, which is to be expected. These games can run on your phone, tablet, toaster, coffee maker. I'm sure you can get them to play on one of those stupid Walgreens fridge screens without an issue. Who the hell thought this was a good idea? So they damn better work on my $500 gaming machine. You may get some audio issues depending on the core you use, so there might be a bit of trial and error at first, but they're fine once you find the right core and settings. Really, there aren't any problems with these games at all. Nintendo DS deserves its own mini segment. It performs very well like the other handhelds, just don't upscale from native res. Don't do it, it's fine. You're not missing out on 4K anything. But it requires additional setup to optimize controller inputs for its touchscreen feature and microphone. It's very easy to do and should take you less than maybe 3 minutes. It's a bit funky to play these games on a controller, but it's oddly delightful. It's slightly challenging, yet fun. It's weird to describe, so if you can, give it a shot. I spent the most time on N64 because it was the first console I ever had and I had a blast walking through memory lane again, and although it has some problems on the X monolith, they're still quite good. With RetroArch 1.9.12, they're great actually. A lot of the N64 library is playable right out of the gate on the primary core, Mupen 64. Super Mario 64 ran without a hitch, as well as GoldenEye, surprisingly, even at upscaled resolutions. Some games had very negligible errors like small stutters in 3D Zelda cutscenes, image jank in menus and title screens like Mario Fiesta and Kart, and widescreen is available for Mupen 64, but it isn't perfect. Expect some wonky results every now and then with some games. The problems really ramp up with denser games like Donkey Kong 64, which thankfully has a workaround. On default Mupen 64 settings, the game has a couple of features that just don't work, but on top of this, there's a terrible camera glitch that makes the game severely more difficult to play. Platforming is a nightmare. Before these fixes, I completed several levels, including Frantic Factory. I did not have a good time. However, if you configure the settings to look like a classic Nintendo 64 by changing the video and audio plugins, the game runs beautifully. It doesn't look crisp, but at least the game is fully playable. This can also be done for other games you might have fundamental issues with, like Pokemon Snap. There's an alternative option to play on a different core, Parallel 64, which was meant for games that had issues on Mupen 64 like the ones I previously mentioned. But don't do it. It sucks. Ah! What the fuck is happening? And that's N64 emulation. It's fine, could be better, but I'm glad with the results on an Xbox. Not every game runs beautifully, but most do, and I'm pretty darn happy with that. The PlayStation emulator, Duckstation, has its own UWP package that can be run without RetroArch, and wow is it good! Games run great on their own at a nice resolution and solid frame rate, but you can enable widescreen mode and change resolution of the game you're playing on the fly. For some RetroArch emulators, restarting the entire program was mandatory for changing these settings. The emulator tends to max out at 4K resolution on the Xbox system, but that's fine. Clearly the graphics are very outdated, but having the ability to run these games at 4K stable FPS without any problems is a true testament to how powerful the emulator and the Xbox is. The emulator is also on RetroArch, however I found the performance kind of lacking. I experienced a handful of crashes on RetroArch and some stutter when upscaling to 1080p or beyond. The UWP Duckstation is definitely the way to go for solid PlayStation emulation. I didn't play much PlayStation when I was younger, but this is a damn good way to do that now. It's a great emulator that is very easy to install and get running with phenomenal performance on an Xbox. Gamecube and Wii games are just as good, but do come with some issues. Namely, there is a bit of stutter in a game's initial playthrough. Because the way the rendering works on the Dolphin core RetroArch, you'll experience a small amount of stutter when you come to a new level, enter a new area, or the game introduces new elements. You may not experience the most smoothest gameplay, but the stuttering is minimal and you get used to it after some time. All the games I tested were fully playable and unaltered from the original experience, with only one outlier that was acting very strange. Twilight Princess became a choppy gameplay nightmare in the forest area, but soon after exiting the area and playing the rest of the game, it was fine. Still, GameCube emulation is honestly quite impressive. Wii games share the same attributes as GameCube, which makes sense as they run in the same emulator. The controls are a big pain in the ass to set up, but once you get them working, Wii games are fully playable. Well, at least the one I tested. And finally we come to PlayStation 2, which, good God, I think is one of the contributing factors to my drinking problem. Updates to RetroArch either make PS2 emulation possible, or they just break it altogether. This is why this video took so long to make. I've been waiting for stable PS2 emulation, and god damn it, we're not getting it anytime soon. When I made the first video, it was working beautifully, just needed some minor adjustments. It had a widescreen feature, multiple games were playable, and could be upscaled to 1080p max FPS. Then it didn't work. Then it did, and finally it doesn't, at least for 1.9.12. This is forgivable given that the core is still in alpha, so there's going to be a sizable wait time until PCXS2 is fully operational on UWP RetroArch. When it was operational, I was severely impressed with the performance of some games. Grand Theft Auto Vice City ran extremely well with only one frame rate issue in my 60-minute experience. Jak and Daxter was on the verge of perfect emulation. Gameplay was great, but there were small graphical errors that simply needed some polishing. God of War ran incredibly well. This was surprising to me given the game's size.
Oh my god, it's so fucking big.
And Shadow of the Colossus was a stuttering frame rate mess, but I could definitely see the game being completely enjoyable once the PCXS2 core becomes much more reliable. It's quite impressive that the quality of PCXS2 on the Xbox was so good since it was implemented just in May 2021, I believe, and cannot wait for the emulator to be stabilized. I long for the day I can say I can play PS2 games on my Xbox, and honestly, I'd say we're pretty darn close to that. Gonna have to wait a bit longer though. Now, with the show and tell portion out of the way, let's return to answering the lingering question of this video. Why emulate games on an Xbox? The answer is still the same. Because you can. Emulation is a fantastic way to preserve older games, and it's great that Microsoft and the Xbox allows you to do it. For decades, people have been hacking and modifying their systems, all for the pleasure of playing their favorite games and preserving them. The barrier to do that is now shrinking, and the Xbox is doing a fine job of diminishing that barrier. These are powerful machines that allow you to play titles like this, but also, if you wanted to, lets you play this as well with incredible performance. With the way companies have been trying to sell you the older games and falling on their faces while doing it, it's great to know that there is an alternative despite you not owning the hardware to even get them. I would have loved to have one of these as a kid, just one machine that gave me the liberty to switch between all these consoles, all from the comfort of my couch. And okay, sure, this can all be done via PC, but if you're like me who uses a PC mainly for work, writing, video editing, email, using Microsoft Excel to convince my friends and family that I'm an actual adult, then you might want to consider using separate machines for work and play. Another PC would be too costly and space consuming. Then I'll use the Xbox for almost all things gaming. And as I've shown before in this video, performance is great. Even though I did this all on a Series X console, the exact same thing can be achieved on a Series S, which is only priced at $299. If you couple this with Game Pass, you have your hands on tons of amazing games. So to try to wrap this all up, let's reiterate the original question and answer. Why would you want to emulate on an Xbox? And to put it simply, because you can. Microsoft and the Xbox give you the tools to do what a gaming console was meant for, to play games. Now the limitations of what games you can play on the platform are almost fully removed. May not be Miles Morales, but I can finally play Spider-Man on my Xbox. I'll take it. And sure, it's not perfect, but RetroArch is getting better with every update, and pretty soon, every core will run smooth as butter. There are a couple of downsides, like having to switch between the Xbox's retail mode and developer mode, and that process can typically take 3 to 5 minutes. Small price to pay for just a stupid amount of games you can now play. The setup is convoluted and clunky, sure, but there are now several resources you can turn to make setup simple and understandable. And as more people find out about this and try it for themselves, the community will grow and more help will be readily available. The $20 you have to spend in order to make this all work may be off-putting to some. I can't do anything about it, your complaints mean nothing to me. But let's be real, it's an insignificant cost that won't leave you bankrupt or homeless. Typically, a game can cost you $20. You put $20 on this, you can have tons of games, most of which aren't broken and fully completed. Oh, shots fucking fired. And who knows what else you can do with dev mode and the Microsoft dev account. If for some reason you ever want to run Linux on your Xbox, that might be a future possibility. If some smart motherfucker wants to convert games like Skyrim or Fallout New Vegas into a UWP file, that means you can run it in dev mode without any limitations or restrictions to mods. That sounds pretty awesome. I truly think emulation is the next step in game preservation, so you might as well do it on as many machines as possible while you can. Some companies are vehemently against the idea and practice of emulation and are actively trying to destroy it. And some games might never see a re-release or remaster on newer systems, so emulation might be the only way to save them. Consoles and hardware will degrade over time, servers and marketplaces will eventually shut down. It's important that we keep preserving the games that we love, the games that made us who we are and got us to where we are now. And the Xbox Series X and S have a wonderful way to do that. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you found this interesting. Also, let me know if this is something you'll be doing with your console as well. You already know I strongly recommend doing it because I love emulation and giving Nintendo the finger. But tell me which old title you're excited to play on the Series X or S. Alright, I've wasted enough of your time. My name is Efrain. Adios.